The Incredibles is the greatest movie of all time. Rage bait, clickbait, title over. Anyway, it's at least my favorite movie of all time. And I'm about to say to you with no script, just me off the top of my head, exactly why that is. So 2 words pop into my head when I think about The Incredibles and its greatness, and that would be thematic material. So in The Incredibles, I firmly believe that they were not just trying to they weren't just trying to make a kids movie. I believe they were trying to say something about society that should have been said, but they're doing it in a more subtle way. So for me, the heroes in this movie are not just, flashy, showy cartoon characters that we look at, in awe and excitement. No, I believe they're actually representing the exceptional people in society that suffer the woes of poppy syndrome, tall poppy syndrome. And in this case, you've got Bob Parr, Mr. Incredible. You've got Helen Parr, Miss Elastigirl. You've got Dash, who's the, speedy, fast kid. And then you've got Violet, who is the girl who's still discovering some of her powers. Those are the 4 main characters, and essentially the person who suffers most from this, super vindication that they go on when they're basically, giving the supers lawsuits, they're, saying, poo-poo the Incredible, poo-poo the superheroes, we don't want them to save lives anymore, we want them to live a normal life. The person who suffers most from this is Mr. Incredible. And he really has to battle with himself about his new identity, which is his secret identity, which has become his only identity. And as they quote in I think it's an announcer or a newscast lady who says this in the intro. But yeah, for him, adjusting to that family life and not getting to, live out the work of his dreams, which is hero work, he has to go to an office and essentially be this boss's bitch and do whatever he says and keep him happy, even though some of the stuff that the boss wants him to do is quite questionable, like just ripping off clients, ripping off customers, which happens anyway in real life. But which is again another allegorical moment in the film. But where I was going with that is that Mr. Incredible is representing the person in life that has to essentially live a double life because the exceptional, amazing life that they live gets torn down by others. And you can see this happening with celebrities in real life when they're living this fantastical life. Some of them dress up in different clothes, almost like a disguise when they're going out in public to feel what it's like to be normal. But for Robert Parr, in the movie, he feels the opposite way. So he's like a celebrity that's been been shunned and basically, what's the word? It's so common. When a celebrity's been cancelled, that's it. And they they get forced into living a different sort of life. They have to readjust. It's almost like that for with Robert Parr. Um, but yeah, for the other characters, they seem to be like decently at peace with it, except Dash. Dash, he thinks similarly to his father. I think it's a bit of a like father like son thing in that dynamic where he goes to school and sort of mucks up and acts up because he does things like he'll put a thumbtack underneath the teacher's stool before he sits back down. And he wishes he could compete in sports, which has been disallowed because he'd obviously thrash everyone and then his identity would be discovered. But you've got characters like Violet who she says stuff like, I want to be normal. Like, the only person in this house that's normal is Jack Jack, who we later find out that he has certain powers in the second film. And yeah, so I really think that basically when you see groups of people in real life, like sports stars, celebrities, all that jazz, I really think the supers being shut down and them being vilified for their actions can really be likened to false accusations in the media and cancelling of celebrities, YouTubers, sports stars in the public press. So yeah, moving on from that, something else that I really love about the movie is that is basically the soundtrack. Like the score to this movie is absolutely brilliant. It's like no other I've seen in a kids cartoon. And no, I'm not going to really call it that because for me it's much more than that. And to me it sounds like that sort of music you hear in James Bond, but I actually prefer it because it has this really rich but also crispness to it. It really pings through and you hear every brass instrument just ring through. And for me, the score does so much in the way of accompanying the story, and you can clearly hear it sort of ebb and flow as the plot does, and what's happening in the film, you hear it as well. Another reason I love it is that it's such a quotable movie. You've seen countless memes about Edna, and then that teacher who's like, who's trying to get Dash on camera, and he said, the coincidence? I think not. That guy, you see him everywhere. Like, this movie was made over 20 years ago, and you still see these figures in at least in meme culture, and everyone remembers them. Like, even people that aren't nuts about the movie as much as I am, they remember all these characters. And okay, so moving on to the villain. So one of my favorite villains of all time is Syndrome. He is basically he's pretty much the antithesis of what happens when a avid fanboy gets shut down and then lives the rest of his life with contempt, malice, and jealousy a bit as well towards all the heroes that were born with superpowers. Now, this guy, he wasn't born with anything. he was just incredibly smart, and he invented all these machines and sort of body armor and superhero gear that he uses. Now let's have a closer look at him. So Syndrome spent his child years basically idolizing Mr. Incredible, and then early on in the movie, he tries to jump in his car and go, "Hey man, I can help you. Like with these boots I can fly." And Mr. Incredible his response was, "Oh, sorry, I don't have time for you, mate. Get lost," sort of thing. And that decision that Mr. Incredible made right there to be dismissive. If he had taken a second to go, "Oh, this, I'm not going to actually bring this kid on to my team because I don't want him sort of messing things up. But look, I'm going to give him the time of day. I'm going to make him feel accepted." If he had done that, perhaps we wouldn't have had a story arc that that Syndrome underwent to become, how he went from Buddy to Syndrome. Excuse me just a second, I'm just going to have a swig. And when you see the final form of Syndrome later in the movie, about halfway through, you really see he's been percolating on this for years. Like, this has been his whole plan to invent this killing machine to get rid of the supers. It was while he was going through other supers and they also died, it was really to enact his vengeance on Mr. Incredible. Because, he, as it's sort of happening, he says to Mr. Incredible, "I went through a lot of supers to get to this point." And it's true, like, he is kind of like, to me, what he represents in society is someone like who performs assassinations. Like, some guy like that, like, usually he's paid off, but say there's some crazed assassin who's like, "I don't think this celebrity or this person deserved to be in that position. It could have been me. I could have been up there." He could be the type to just kill someone. But, I think, out of my comparisons, that one isn't quite the strongest. But we can just still look at him as a character and go, Syndrome, like, why does he feel like this? Because maybe growing up he was picked on. So he tried to inflate himself, he tried to make himself feel super. And the person who got in the way of him doing that was Mr. Incredible. So anyway, yeah, that it's interesting to see when people get introduced in a movie and then the timeline skips forward and then they basically come along in that next timeline. And then we have a character who I think isn't explored as much as perhaps she could, which would be Helen or Elastigirl. So in the early part of the movie, you sort of see her in the family dynamic. But scratch that. She's featured a fair amount, and in my head, for some reason, I was comparing it to the fact that Mr. Incredible gets a bit pushed to the side in the second movie. But yeah, anyway, for the first movie that we're talking about, Helen is she kind of plays that sort of housewife kind of character that that she sees Rob trying to relive his glory days, and she basically just wants him to be the humble, grounded, sort of provider man that he is. And like a lot, maybe she tries to pull him back a bit, but he doesn't always see the importance of it, because he's so hell bent on reliving the glory days. And then towards the end of the film, she really comes into play by, she organizes the kids and teaches them more about their powers, and then teams up with Mr. Incredible, who's already on the island, to have the final fight with the to fight Syndrome, to come up against Syndrome, and then have the final fight against the robot killing machine. And yeah, when they're sort of driving back in the big van, towards the end, you really see like their family dynamics getting tested. But at all times she's trying to hold things together, and she's very much like the glue of the family. Sometimes Rob kind of he kind of operates on his own, and whether he's at work or doing super hero work, but she's like the glue. She's the constant that's always there in the family setting, at least. And yeah, for me, she represents the housewife that's trying to hold it down, and that she's a pretty prominent character. Then we've got Edna. So Edna is a bit of a fan favorite, and she's one of my favorites because she's so raw and real, and she has a almost abrasive but also very cheeky sense of humor, and she's kind of like the catalyst, or the catalyst in some way in this movie. Like she's the one who kind of who makes Mr. Incredible's new suit, and along with it, she makes all these suits for the rest of the family. And although these events would still happen without her, she's really, helps to stimulate them and round it all off. And in terms of pacing, this movie does a really good job in having it sort of, build up, then slight peak, and then a trough, and then a build up again, and then a bigger peak, and then a really big climax at the end. And it's really staged out very well, and there's never a dull moment. Like there's never a moment. There are heavy moments. There are moments where it kind of dims down a bit, but you always feel like you're pushing forward, and at no point do I want to look away from the movie. It's the type of movie to make me forget to go to the toilet and go get a drink. And yeah, it's not the sort of movie that I would fall asleep in, put it that way. And I just think there's so much to The Incredibles, and there's a lot of like ways it looks into society, and there's probably some analysis that I've missed that goes into that side of it. But yeah, basically, The Incredibles, I give it an 11 out of 10. It's a fucking amazing movie. I've probably seen it over 20 times, and because for me it's not just a kids movie. Like there's some dark themes in there, and there's some it really goes into places that and hits certain spots that you wouldn't expect, you know, like when yeah, there's just so much about it that I really enjoy. And yeah, I hope you like it too. If you have a favorite movie you've seen, drop it in the comments below. And yeah, this has been me and The Incredibles. See you next time.